Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into the history, the archaeology, and the incredibly human story of Jacob's return to Canaan. We're looking at a narrative where ancient geography literally maps out the process of emotional and spiritual healing. It's a story packed with intense family feuds, massive physical walls, and a desperate search for reconciliation. So let's just jump right in. Think about this for a second. What actually happens when a 20-year family feud, one completely filled with deception and broken promises, finally reaches its boiling point? You get a midnight escape. Jacob is fleeing from his father-in-law, Laban. He's packed up his wives, his kids, his flocks, and they're just slipping away into the dark. But to really get why this escape had to happen, we need to look back at the decades of tension that led up to it. Section 1. The Flight from Laban, a 20-year feud. Now, this wasn't just some impulsive, spur-of-the-moment decision by Jacob. This midnight escape was literally 20 years in the making. It was the inevitable result of a totally toxic cycle of manipulation. I mean, the sheer scale of the exploitation Jacob endured is staggering. He put in 20 grueling years of labor. First, 7 years just to marry Rachel, only to be tricked into marrying Leah. Then another 7 years for Rachel. And finally, 6 more years just to build up his own flocks. And get this, during all of that, Laban changed his wages 10 different times. You can imagine that resentment just compounding year after year. And the tension wasn't just with Laban. Inside Jacob's own tents, there was this intense, honestly heartbreaking family dysfunction playing out. On one side, we have Leah. She's blessed with children, but she painfully lacks her husband's true love. Then on the other side, there's Rachel. She has Jacob's deep, devoted love, but she's battling this agonizing barrenness. It's a bitter rivalry, fueled by profound insecurities and unfulfilled desires. And it's all happening right under the shadow of a deeply manipulative father. The emotional toll here is just staggering. Listen to this. Give me children or else I die. You can literally hear the absolute desperation in Rachel's voice, right? This wasn't just a mild disappointment for her. This was a devastating existential crisis. And that intense emotional pain, that was the driving force behind some of the really drastic decisions she goes on to make. Section 2. Rachel's Tragedy. Desperation and Actions. Because Rachel and her sister felt like they were being treated as strangers by their own father, essentially stripped of their inheritance, they take drastic action on their way out. Rachel actually steals Laban's household idols, known as the teraphim. Why? Well, probably to claim a piece of the inheritance she felt was rightfully hers. And when Laban eventually catches up to them and furiously tears through their tents looking for them, Rachel totally outsmarts him. She hides the idols inside her camel saddle, sits right on them, and claims she's unwell and just can't stand up. It is a brilliant, high-stakes game of hide-and-seek. Section 3. The Covenant at Mizpah, Resolving the Conflict. So after a relentless 7-day chase, Laban finally corners Jacob out in the hill country. You can cut the tension with a knife. 2 decades of deception, theft, and simmering anger have all led up to this intense, face-to-face physical confrontation. To avoid total disaster, they establish a covenant at a place called Mizpah. Now, Mizpah is a Hebrew word that means watchtower. They literally had to call on God to act as a watchman over them because their trust in one another was at absolute zero. They basically say, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. God had to step in as a witness to hold this incredibly fragile piece together. But here's the thing. Mizpah wasn't just some abstract spiritual concept. It became a very real physical place. Let me throw a fascinating piece of history at you. Back in 1926, an archaeologist named Dr. Bade was excavating Tel and Nazbah, which is the ancient site of Mizpah. And right on the very first day, they uncovered something wild. They found defense walls that were a massive 4 meters thick. To put that into perspective, these ancient defense walls reached 12 to 14 meters high. That's roughly the height of a 4-story building. And they were built with stones so incredibly heavy that it took 3 or 4 grown men just to move a single one of them. Now, think about the symbolism there. These impenetrable, towering physical walls perfectly mirror the massive, defensive emotional walls that had been built up between Jacob and Laban over 20 years of constant betrayal. To officially seal their agreement, they gathered stones into a huge heap. Jacob called it Gilead, which is Hebrew for witness heap. and Laban called it Yegar Sahadata in his native Aramaic. This physical pile of stones served as a permanent boundary line, a very strict marker of separation. It was a powerful visual reminder of their covenant. Laban wouldn't pass the heap to harm Jacob, and Jacob wouldn't pass it to harm Laban. Section 4. The Balm of Gilead, a source of healing. Beyond just being a boundary line, this specific geographical area was actually famous throughout the entire ancient world for a remarkable natural resource, the Balm of Gilead. And as we'll see, this resource serves as a really profound metaphor for what this severely broken family desperately needed. To harvest this valuable balm, you actually have to cut or crush the tree's bark. The sap then flows from that wound, the resin hardens, and it's used to create these incredibly valuable sweet perfumes and healing medicines. There's this beautiful, almost heartbreaking irony to it. The tree literally has to be wounded and broken in order to produce the medicine that heals. Which brings to mind that famous, provocative question posed by the prophet Jeremiah centuries later. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? It's such a powerful thought. When human relationships are totally fractured by deception, when we build massive emotional walls like the ones at Mizpah, Jeremiah reminds us that God is the ultimate physician. He's the true source of healing for our deepest, self-inflicted wounds. Section 5. The Process of Maturity, Jacob's Spiritual Arc. To bring this whole narrative arc to its climax, we really have to look at what happens to Jacob after the separation. His journey back to Canaan wasn't just about changing his geography, it actually triggered the ultimate spiritual and emotional evolution of his entire life. Let's trace this lifelong arc for a second. In Genesis 27, Jacob is a deceiver. He's a supplanter, relying entirely on his own wits. Fast forward to Genesis 37, after wrestling with God and dealing with immense family tragedy, he is a transformed man. But it's actually not until Genesis 47 that he becomes a truly mature patriarch. True maturity, at least as we see it in Jacob's life, comes from God slowly emptying us of our own selfish will and our own ambitions so that he can fill us with his divine life. So, what does that maturity actually look like in practice? Well, Jacob endured the agonizing, just heart-wrenching loss of his favorite son, Joseph, for years. And through all that pain, and through famine, he finally stopped relying on his own cunning and learned to trust God's mercy entirely. The ultimate mark of his maturity really shines through at the very end of his life. When his own will was fully subdued, he stood before the mighty Pharaoh of Egypt, and he blessed him. Then he blessed Joseph's sons. Think about that. A man who spent his youth scheming and stealing blessings from others ends his life freely pouring out blessings upon everyone around him. It's an incredible turnaround. We've covered some incredible ground today, haven't we? From bitter 20-year family feuds and massive stone watchtowers, all the way to the fragrant, healing balm of Gilead. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. Look at your own life for a moment. Where are the thick emotional walls that you've built up? And how might the ancient, wounded balm of Gilead, that deep healing that comes from God, bring true reconciliation to your own broken relationships today? Definitely something to think about as you go about your week. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep exploring.